The multinational conglomerates, the banking cartels, and their bought government are all getting scared. The mouthpiece for their system of control, the mainstream media, is hemorrhaging. And the fear that the professional sports-addled, prescription drug-addicted, television-droned, Walmart shopping credit card debt-holding, zombified population might be slowly awaking from their slumber is terrifying. Trust in the controlled media has been smashed in 2016, and in a last desperate gambit, they've pulled their last rabbit out of their proverbial hat, thrown up the smokescreen and mirrors, and called it fake news. She had the corporations with her. She had Hollywood behind her. She had the tech companies and the banking cartels, the international corporations, the military-industrial complex. She had the Democratic Party as well as the Republican Party behind her. And she still lost. And it's this guy's fault, or so the mainstream controlled media would like you to believe. And they keep on repeating it ad infinitum, thinking that if they keep saying it over and over, not only will people believe it, but it will make it so. Funny how they seem to have not picked up on the fact that former British ambassador Craig Murray, who works with WikiLeaks, has categorically stated the hacked emails from Hillary Clinton's campaign manager John Podesta did not come from or connected to anyone in Russia in any way, but were in fact leaked by a Washington insider. But this doesn't matter. They've already created the smokescreen, and anyone who says different is peddling fake news.
What the WikiLeaks dump makes clear is how the sausage is made in politics. And I think it's interesting just on that level. Also interesting is, remember, it's illegal to possess these stolen documents. It's different for the media. So everything you learn about this, you're learning from us. And in full disclosure, let's take a look at what is in there and what it means. Joining us now, CN.
Fake news is this year's hot buzzword, and it would seem that governments and corporations are starting to get worried. Fake news is, of course, out there. You see it all the time on social media as well as across the internet and your TV screens. The problem is, where does quote-unquote real news end and the quote-unquote fake news begin? Let's remember that the whole fake news hot-button issue that the controlled media is now using to justify its own existence began during the 2016 election cycle, where the whole reeking edifice was shown to the world as the banking and corporate-owned mouthpiece that it is. Also, and not so coincidentally, the hysteria surrounding fake news began with just slight lag, but almost simultaneously with the investigation into allegations that have been collectively labeled Pizzagate. You also see the entire apparatus of the controlled media, as well as Hollywood and their controlled minions called celebrities. Well, they're all also out to discredit the allegations before the investigation ever even really began. What 2016, if nothing else, will be remembered as the year that many of those who for generations have been sedated by the controlled media woke up and saw it for the control mechanism that it really is. Even the vaunted and lauded New York Times, realizing that their blatant partisanship in the 2016 election cycle was so extreme, and as a result has seen its subscription base hemorrhage, has had to crawl down on its knees, acknowledge their bias and failure to report accurately, and have begged forgiveness for destroying its public trust. Get used to this term. You're going to be hearing about it a lot. Fake news is whatever the corporate-controlled media or government tells you it is. So that is to say, we have actually reached a post-truth society. Facts no longer matter. When facts no longer matter, communication is all but impossible, as witnessed by the 2016 election cycle. Don't want to have people talk about it? Call it fake news. Case in point. On the 17th of December 2016, Phoenix Maricopa County Sheriff Joe Arpaio has stated that his 5 years' worth of investigatory information would be turned over to Congress, and it shows categorically that the birth certificate produced by President Barack Obama is a forgery. He doesn't, however, dispute Barack Obama's birthplace. What he has stated is that there is clear and convincing proof that the certification was a fraudulently manufactured document. But as you'd guess, the controlled media is not picking it up. CNN, Time, MSNBC, and a host of others refuse to report on this very newsworthy item. It's been reported by a few outfits, the USA Today and a couple of European websites like The Independent out of Ireland, as well as across the alternative media. And speaking of Europe, never a bastion of freedom of speech or conscience, Germany is also now getting involved in the so-called fake news. Trying to keep a lid on the crime infestation and tidal wave of violence and rape that Angela Merkel has willfully and gleefully imported with her call for all of Africa and the Middle East to come to Germany and live off state benefits, the chairman of Germany's Social Democratic Party, Thomas Oppermann, has suggested a new law that would require companies like Facebook to set up an office in the country that would deal with fake news and, of course, the other buzzword, hate speech at all hours of the day. According to the English language version of the German news site Deutsche Welle, German legislators are considering whether to institute a policy that if Facebook's local office did not delete the news item or hate speech within 24 hours, the social network could expect a fine of 500,000 euros per item. Now remember, in today's Germany, as well as most of the rest of Europe, hate speech is basically anything the government says it is. Not wanting your town overwhelmed by migrants is hate speech. Not wanting your children raped is hate speech. Calling a Muslim in the act of mass murder a wanker is hate speech. And thus, whatever the government deems to be hate speech is in fact fake news, and it is clamping down hard on people's ability to gain information on the reality and outcome of government policies that affect them in their daily lives. So let's be clear, this push against so-called fake news is being used by governments for the sole reason of coming down on and rooting out dissent. While Americans may scoff at Germany and Europeans in general for their lack of freedom, they may not be smiling for long. In the great American tradition of tacking on appropriation and spending for projects onto larger authorizations, and in the spirit of bipartisanship, Senator Rob Portman, Republican from Ohio, who is owned by investment banking, and Chris Murphy, Democrat from Connecticut, whose largest campaign contributor is the George Soros-backed MoveOn.org, co-sponsored the Countering Disinformation and Propaganda Act. And without fanfare, it slipped through by tacking it on to the fiscal year 2017 National Defense Authorization Act and has already passed the Senate. Its stated goal is to improve the ability of the United States to counter foreign propaganda and disinformation by establishing an interagency center housed at the State Department to coordinate and synchronize counter-propaganda efforts throughout the U.S. government. To support these efforts, the bill also creates a grant program for NGOs, think tanks, civil society, and other experts outside the government who are engaged in counter-propaganda related work. This will better leverage existing expertise and empower local communities to defend themselves from foreign manipulation. Or in layman's terms, state is creating a propaganda department with large grants available to think tanks and other groups that parasitically live off the largesse of Washington in the revolving door of lobbyists and government. Or basically, the United States government has created a ministry of truth to decide on what news is real and what news will be called fake. They openly boast about paying journalists as well as media organizations, among others, to identify so-called disinformation and engage in counter-propaganda. The only blip about the U.S. government's new and official Department of Propaganda has been on a few alternative media sites. Nothing coming from the controlled media, fake news it would seem. But the act will greenlight the government's ability to crack down with impunity against any media organizations it deems propaganda, and it will also provide substantial amounts of money to fund an army of so-called local journalists counter-propaganda to make sure the government's own fake news drowns out that of the still free fringes or alternative media. The time for Americans to scoff at and laugh at the lack of freedom in Europe and Canada is over. The current controlled media hysteria with regards to fake news is nothing but a smokescreen and their last desperate attempt to put independent journalism back in the bottle and keep their comatose society zombified as they work out how to control the flow of information in the digital age. Thanks for watching. If you like this video, please consider subscribing and also follow us on the usual social media and check out our new website for new and interesting information that's updated daily.